It's 1:30 in the morning on February 17th, 2019. A young woman puts her feet up in her quiet home in Idaho Falls when the unthinkable becomes reality.
This is incredibly scary. It's late in the night. The homeowner is relaxing on the couch on her phone when all of a sudden some intruder is walking up her stairs armed with a shotgun.
You're not expecting this. You feel safe. You're getting ready probably for bed. And the next thing you know, there's a guy with a shotgun pointing it in your face.
The woman doesn't move, kind of like the deer frozen in headlights. It's unbelievable. You're already in your house. There's no way you can run.
But as the woman shrinks from the shotgun-wielding assailant, her fiancé emerges from the kitchen and springs into action.
This guy reacts super quickly. He sees this guy with the shotgun, and he just tries to grab the shotgun from him. He is in full-on fight mode.
As the woman cowers next to the couch, frozen in terror, things become even more terrifying.
This is a knockdown, drag-out brawl. It's a fight for survival at this point. We see the fiancé fall to the ground. He still doesn't let go of the shotgun. Then we see the gunman drag the fiancé literally down the stairs. If he lets go of this shotgun, he can get shot. His fiancé can get shot. So he has to hold on for dear life. Otherwise, it could mean certain death.
As they disappear down the stairs, the young woman, 18-year-old Isabel Allen, jumps up, runs to the bedroom and calls the police, while her fiancé, 21-year-old Cash Shamel, fights desperately for control of the gun.
As he's dragging me down the stairs by the shotgun, I just held on for dear life. I'm very surprised myself he didn't shoot me.
This terrifying assault begins when Cash and Isabel are at their most vulnerable.
We'd actually just gotten back from a date. We did one of those escape rooms. We're feeling pretty good about the night. I was just making a drink, getting ready to relax for the evening, and she was watching a crime documentary, just kind of idly scrolling through social media.
Cash, an aspiring musician, and Isabel, a cosmetology student, got engaged just a few days earlier. And as the happy young couple begin to wind down for the night, their 4 housemates are already asleep in the back bedrooms.
So there was 6 people in the house at the time. The door swung open, and I didn't think anything of it until he got up the stairs with the shotgun.
Caught off guard in his own home, Cash has only a split second to react.
Your brain is just pure adrenaline, and you don't have a whole lot of time to make these decisions. And I take on this 225-pound guy. So I kind of sized him up with my eyes, and there was beads of sweat on his forehead. There was attention to him. And then he started telling me, sit down, sit down. And I saw that I could get that barrel out of the line of fire and out of my way and her way to get it towards the ceiling. So that's what I did. Once I grabbed the barrel of the shotgun, he instinctively reacted and tried to pull it backwards. It's my strength versus his strength with his shotgun.
We hear the cursing and the screaming going back and forth. It's like this perpetrator is actually offended that this homeowner is putting up a fight and won't allow himself to be robbed.
As they wrestle for control, Cash screams out to his housemates for help.
Something good! Now!
I have an AR-15 and a Glock. So as soon as we're on the ground, I start yelling for my roommate, Dustin, guns, Dustin, guns. And he picks up the shotgun and he starts dragging us down towards the stairs.
Who is this masked assailant? Why did he target this home? And how is this going to end? After a shotgun-wielding thug bursts into his home late at night, Cash Shamel takes daring action and finds himself in a desperate fight for survival.
This assailant seemed to have everything planned out. He makes his movements deliberate up the stairs, and he knows how to hold that shotgun.
He was finger on the trigger, ready to go, making demands and thinking he was in charge. But I made a conscious decision to not just roll over and become a victim. I was fully ready to take a shotgun shell to the chest if that's what it meant.
The knockdown, drag-out brawl leads to a tumble down the stairs, where fortune turns the struggle in Cash's favor.
He slips, and he falls pretty hard. I grabbed his shotgun, hit him with the butt in the face as many times as I could. My roommates finally show up, and they don't know what's going on at all. And eventually, he decided, all right, I'm sick of this. I'm gonna leave now. And he's scrambling out the door.
The burglar seems to flee into the night, but in a shocking twist, just a few moments later, he turns around and retraces his steps.
He circled back around my yard and walked back to the front door. I could not honestly believe the guts of him.
The cops are on their way, but Cash's adrenaline is still pumping, and he's prepared to defend his home.
I've been in a stick-up type situation before, and after that, I made a decision never to let that happen again. And Idaho actually eliminated the need for a concealed carry permit, so I have carried a long gun since I was 18. I've been a pistol since I turned 21. So when he came back, he was still trying to be physically aggressive. And you see it in the video, he's standing there with the AR-15, the pistol at the top of the stairs for a while. My roommates are then at the base of the stairs, keeping him there. And we're having a conversation with this guy. He's trying to make a deal with us to get his shotgun back.
In all my years in law enforcement, I have never seen anyone try to do this.
Determined to retrieve his shotgun, the perpetrator makes an outrageous threat.
The tables turned completely. Now you have this intruder threatening to call the police on the guy who lives in the home that he's defending.
I'm calling the police on you now. I'm calling the police on you, too.
He's talking about making a deal and a trade.
Make a deal? What's the deal? You guys leaving me up and back and I'll shoot you at the head? Yeah. How I still want
That was beyond me, beyond anything I could even imagine would ever happen.
Come into my home!
Yeah, it definitely set me off, and I just couldn't deal with it anymore, so I just walked down the stairs, and that's when I pistol whipped him.
You understand?
Just as Cash is about to get carried away by his rage, one of his roommates steps in.
My other roommate freaks out, the one that's blonde and comes up the stairs. He helps to push the guy out the door, and we can see as we're pushing him out the door, blue and red and white lights all coming around the corner. And so I showed them the footage immediately. They were like, "Did you kill him?" I was like, "No, he's alive, he left." They said, "Okay, good."
Police are soon hot on the heels of this still armed would-be burglar. They quickly locate the assailant in his car just a few blocks away, passed out from the beating he received at Cash's hands. In his possession are drugs, firearms, and a manifesto detailing the rules and hierarchy of a gang.
During this time, I'm finally starting to come down off the adrenaline high, so I'm shaking. There's a little bit of nausea, and then an overwhelming sense of just frustration.
One question hangs over the dark winter night. Why target Cash and Isabel?
In the aftermath, I kind of learned that he was coming over to settle some kind of a debt. They're looking around for money and drugs, but he obviously had no idea about who really lived in the house.
The suspect is identified as 28-year-old Eddie Walker. He's charged and convicted for felony aggravated battery and sentenced to 14 years in prison.
Cash's actions, although desperate, are heroic. He has the absolute right to defend himself in his own home.
But for Cash and Isabel, the ordeal has left a lasting mark.
It affected her deeply for a while, but we got through it together. We got married in October, and we're doing great. Looking back on it now, I really feel like I maybe would have wanted to react a little less aggressively, but the biggest thing for me was the dude's not dead, we're not dead, nobody died, like, thank God no one is dead.
Coming up, Two elderly women find themselves on the defensive when a man goes berserk.
I saw a hand reaching for the carafe, and the next thing I knew, there was an excruciating pain on the back side of my head.
September 29th, 2019, 4:25 p.m. A pair of elderly women sit down at a restaurant in Phoenix, Arizona. Then, their quiet afternoon is suddenly shattered by brutal violence.
Starts off tranquil and peaceful. Two women sitting at a table, drinking coffee. A strange man walks up to the table, and then all of a sudden, we're just immersed in violent behavior.
He grabs the coffee carafe and begins to mercilessly beat this elderly woman repeatedly.
The attack is shockingly savage and seems to come out of nowhere.
This didn't appear to be a man on the verge of violence. He just happened to be walking by. Maybe he was going to his table or going to the restroom.
There's no indication that this man knows this woman. This seems completely random and out of control.
As one woman tries to get away and the man chases after her, other diners flee.
They get out of there, which is incredibly smart, because if someone tries to intervene, it could make this person even angrier. We don't know if he's armed, if he's high on drugs. We just have no idea.
And with the restaurant emptied out, the two elderly women, 69-year-old Jane Tyre-Tyrones and her friend, 73-year-old Jacqueline, who was so violently beaten, are left to fend for themselves. For these two old friends, this was supposed to be a relaxing day out on the town.
Jackie and I go to the casino every Sunday because you get a $20 gas card and free play. So we go to the casino, and then afterwards we stop and get something to eat.
This was a regular weekly tradition for these two women. They're both elderly, tired, and that was one of their favorite pastimes.
Both Jackie and I like pancakes, and it was right on our way. At first, there was absolutely nothing unusual. They seated us at the first table by the door, and I noticed that there was one table across from us with a couple and some kids, and that was the only other people that I saw. We were probably there maybe 15 minutes. We hadn't even actually placed our order yet. I was on my phone, and I saw a hand reaching for the carafe, and I didn't look up because I assumed that it was our waiter. And the next thing I knew, there was an excruciating pain on the back side of my head. I went down and hit the table, split my chin open, and don't remember anything for a few seconds.
Jane blacks out as the crazed assailant continues his rampage. But why has he attacked them? And what is he going to do to her friend?
Phoenix 911, where is your emergency?
The customer just came in and started attacking some other customers, and there's blood involved.
After an unprovoked assault, Jane Tyre-Tyrones momentarily loses consciousness after being struck on the head. And the assailant immediately pounces on her companion, Jacqueline.
You see him repeatedly strike Jacqueline in the head and face. And that's some of the hardest film to watch because you can see the terror in her eyes. Jacqueline quickly gets into a defensive position, starts trying to protect herself, and he's just repeatedly pounding on her.
Jane comes to only seconds later and scrambles for safety.
The only thing I could think of was getting out of the booth and getting away so that I didn't get hit again. I saw one of the employees, so I got behind him, and he took me to the back, through the kitchen and into a security room where all the monitors for the video cameras were. And all the employees was in the back room. They were all really young, and they didn't really know for sure what to do. So I made sure that somebody had called the police.
Meanwhile, Jacqueline is left alone in the dining room with their attacker when the fight takes a surprising turn.
He's grabbing other coffee canisters. He's grabbing other plates. He starts throwing them at her, and she's throwing things at him in an attempt to get him to leave.
Hiding in a storage room, Jane watches in horror on the security monitors. Is her friend going to survive this brutal attack?
When I saw that Jackie was throwing the dishes back at the assailant, it certainly didn't surprise me. She's always pretty much been pretty feisty, but I could see she had a cut above her eye and there was blood coming down the side of her face.
But Jacqueline isn't giving up. As her attacker continues to chase her, she makes a desperate run for the back hallway.
She goes back to the bathroom and is trying to find other people to get help.
Now alone in the dining area, the once violent man seems to pull himself together and turns his attention to committing other crimes.
He starts actually picking up things, and he grabs someone's bag that they left behind.
He grabs some of the family's belongings, and then he goes to the 2 elderly women's booth, grabs some of their belongings. I believe he actually took one of their cell phones.
With her assailant distracted, Jacqueline takes the opportunity to run out the front door as the crazed man makes his way into the kitchen, where things get even scarier.
He picks up a pot and he burns his hand, and then he moves to place a rag on the open flame, starting a fire.
This person is out of control and just in destroy mode. Everything about this is erratic and illogical.
He went from attacking a woman to stealing property to starting a fire. It's all just crazy at this point.
The strange man seems to be lashing out in every way he can. But why? All the while, Jane and the employees are trapped in the security room, praying that he won't find them or that the restaurant won't burn down.
I was back there probably 10 to 15 minutes, and it seemed like we were in there forever. I just felt helpless.
When the police arrive moments later, they see a male in a red shirt exit the building through an emergency door and sprint across the parking lot. He fits the description they've been given by an employee who called 911.
It's a white guy wearing a red shirt with black pants.
And he's quickly taken into custody. Inside the restaurant, employees quickly extinguish the fire, and at last, the rampage is over.
We didn't get let out of the room until the police got there. And when I got outside, they had him sitting down with his hands cuffed behind his back.
He's identified as 47-year-old Joe Meza, a homeless veteran who has struggled with mental illness and has had many run-ins with the law before.
We do know that there are higher rates of PTSD and mood disorders and sometimes substance use with veterans, but people who have PTSD, they're not typically violent like this.
The criminal justice system isn't really set up for mental health issues, so we end up in this circle all the time because even though they have mental issues, they're still committing crimes. We have actual victims, and these victims demand justice.
Jane and Jacqueline both sustained serious injuries from the terrifying ordeal.
I drove us to the hospital. They didn't have an ambulance. By the time we got to the hospital, her eye was already almost swollen shut and black and blue. The cut on my chin took 5 stitches to close, and the cut above her eye took 3 stitches.
But the psychological scars may never heal.
It's made me much more cautious. I won't sit at the table by the door, and I don't like it when people are behind me because I always get the feeling I'm going to be blindsided again, and that scares me. But I think it's worse for Jackie because I do believe that she has nightmares from being face to face with him.
Meza is charged with 2 counts of aggravated assault, theft, and disorderly conduct, and is currently awaiting trial.
They want justice to be served, and if he does have issues, for him to get help and get those issues resolved. I think knowing why it maybe happened could give them some measure of closure.
There are almost 4 million miles of roads in the United States. And there are certain times when driving on them is especially dangerous.
The truck heading the wrong way down northbound 131.
July 27th, 2018, 2 a.m., Wyoming, Michigan. In the dark hours of the early morning, a call goes out to officers patrolling the streets.
Police get a call for a wrong-way driver on the highway, driving drunk. That generally ends with someone being killed. On a scale of 1 to 10, this is a 15.
Police Sergeants Chris DeBoer and Rob Meredith respond to the call.
So at 2 a.m. in the morning, it's not uncommon for police to get calls for drunk drivers because that's when the bars are closing, that's when people are out on the roads. So the objective here is to stop this drunk driver before he or she winds up injuring or killing someone, including themselves.
They know the runaway pickup truck is heading south on the northbound 131 highway, and hundreds of unsuspecting drivers have no idea the danger racing towards them.
Many lives could be lost. That impact is tremendous. They don't have a lot of time. They have to come up with a plan.
As the officers race through the dark side streets south of where the pickup truck was last spotted, there's only one thought on their minds.
We got to get traffic stopped. We have the luxury of having radios and hearing what's going on. Other people traveling northbound have no clue what's coming at them at 80, 90 miles an hour. That was our main goal, was to get there, block traffic, shut it down, get people off the roadway.
The patrol car takes the ramp to Highway 131 heading north and comes to a stop. It's about 3 miles south of where the truck was last reported seen heading into oncoming traffic.
And we thought we'd just stop traffic, and that was merely our intention.
So far, the sergeants are in luck. Highway 131 seems relatively quiet in both directions. Maybe too quiet. And then, a pair of oncoming headlights appears on the horizon, much earlier than anticipated.
As soon as we positioned our vehicle, the truck was coming at us around the curve and underneath the bridge. We really didn't have time to shut everything down.
And now, the two officers are all that stands between the speeding pickup truck and the traffic heading north.
You know, when I was in the academy 20-some years ago, there was never really any discussion on how to stop a wrong-way driver on the expressway. I used our spotlight. I move it back and forth in the roadway to try to grab his attention, good or bad. I was hoping just one more visual cue that, hey, we're here, and you're going the wrong way.
But the truck only picks up speed. Sergeants DeBoer and Meredith can no longer merely stop traffic. They must make a decision that could cost them their lives. Try to stop the truck itself.
Police are used to chasing speeders on the highway. Sometimes, in order to bring that speeder to a halt, they will enact a maneuver called a pit maneuver, where they will try to move the back of the vehicle by using the front of their cruiser and having the vehicle spin around off to the side of the road.
This is going above and beyond the call of duty. You are literally putting your life in harm's way to prevent this driver from hurting other people. These police officers are now thinking about mathematics and physics. How do we position our car to just throw this other car off slightly? It's like a tangent.
We are going to set up like this.
So it's really a risky decision. Is this going to work? They're going to find out.
These officers are basically putting themselves in between the speeding drunk driver going against traffic and the traffic behind them.
Watch yourself, watch yourself.
Their mission at that point is to literally, purposely hit the vehicle. They are in a very scary situation, and they know that this could go really, really wrong.
As the truck approaches, Sergeants DeBoer and Meredith can only hope and pray that they will survive the inevitable impact.
I do remember wanting to keep it in drive. Foot was on the brake and on the gas. He's coming around the curve. He's still in the inside lane, which is next to the cement barrier, which I think we're going to be okay. But seconds later, he straightens out his turn and is coming straight at us.
A car accident involving a police car shut down a portion of US 131.
July 26, 2018, in Wyoming, Michigan, starts as an ordinary Thursday night for Sergeants Rob Meredith and Chris DeBoer, until a frightening call comes over the airwaves.
There was a wrong-way driver on the expressway, southbound 131 in the northbound lanes. At the time, our cars were all out on the road. That's the one reason why we jumped in together. I was driving, he was passenger. We know each other, we're friends, but we never actually worked in the same cruiser together. We just got promoted. I've been at Wyoming for almost 21 years. He's been here 9 years or so. That was our very first shift ever working in the same car together.
On their minds is the same terrible question.
How are we going to stop this 80 to 90 mile an hour missile heading southbound with unsuspecting traffic going northbound?
But the reckless driver doesn't slow down. And now, the two officers are all that stands between the speeding truck and unsuspecting traffic to the south. Lives will be lost if they don't act immediately.
That moment when you have an oncoming vehicle heading straight for you and you have nowhere to go is just a very surreal moment to be in, because your life is literally flashing in front of you.
And at the final possible moment, Officer DeBoer makes a sudden move.
I jerk the steering wheel to the left, and when I jerk it to the left, I suddenly accelerate, and that's when we crash. After the crash happened, everything slowed down. I was still breathing, which I thought was good. I remember hitting my head. I remember quite a bit of neck pain, but I remember that I could still talk, I could still breathe.
Sergeant Chris DeBoer is still alive, but he's filled with dread about his partner, Sergeant Rob Meredith, who was sitting on the passenger side, which bore the brunt of the impact.
It was a gut check moment, like I didn't really know.
You all right? Yep.
What I remember most about the impact, really, that takes me back to it is the smell of the airbag chemical. That is what will stick with me the longest. We'd look to each other, you good? You good? Okay, we're good.
Vehicle continuing southbound.
After hitting the squad car, the badly damaged truck continues down Highway 131 for more than a mile before finally coming to a stop.
Because this vehicle was so disabled, they were able to catch up to it, kind of get in front of it.
Get your hands off the window!
Where other Wyoming officers are ready to pounce.
6-3 drivers in custody.
Amazingly, Sergeants DeBoer and Meredith are not only still alive, but they have no serious injuries. Their survival may have come down to Sergeant DeBoer's last-minute maneuver.
Officer DeBoer slightly turned the front wheel so that the front bumper really set the other car off its course.
It absolutely saved my life. Two cars coming at each other. He's coming at us at an angle, and it caused a glancing impact. It wasn't a head-on collision where it would have crushed our driver compartment. Avoiding that crush is what saved my life.
Uninjured, the two men get out of the car to survey the damage.
Part of his driver's or passenger side wheel was actually laying next to our cruiser. He was driving on 3 wheels.
The intoxicated driver, 62-year-old Scott Kloosterman, is taken to the hospital in handcuffs. He appears to have been totally unaware he was driving in the wrong direction. And it turns out, just 2 weeks earlier, he had been released from probation for his second drunken driving offense.
He had been drinking in the downtown area. After your third offense and everything after that is a felony level.
Despite the terrifying incident, neither sergeant went home early that night.
We stayed on duty, worked the rest of the shift. There's nothing else to do. I guess just go home, go to bed.
Scott Kloosterman pleads guilty to driving drunk, and he's sentenced to between 15 months and 5 years in prison. He also enters an alcohol treatment program. To this day, Sergeants DeBoer and Meredith know how lucky they are.
I don't think that either one of us went on the roadway with the intention of ramming a guy head on. We come to work thinking we'll go home to our families in the evening. That evening, Rob and I very well could not have gone home to our families.
Other officers were trying to do the same thing as I was. They were trying to stop this car. It just happened that we were in the right position to make that tactical move to do it.
All right, we got them coming at us, dispatch.
These officers did a phenomenal job because they had to come up with a plan in a matter of seconds. No one was severely injured. Certainly no one was killed. You couldn't have asked for a better result.
Coming up, an out-of-control car.
He's driving really fast, man.
On the wrong side of the road.
a terrified family,
Dad, stay back.
and a final confrontation.
Hey, what's up, man? Get the out of the car.
A peaceful summer evening is turned upside down by the sound of screeching tires.
Story comes out of the What Would You Do file. Watch as two men take matters into their own hands.
Hey, what's up, man?
July 22nd, 2017, Houston, Texas. A white Ford Mustang weaves erratically along the quiet streets of the River Oaks neighborhood.
His car is swerving. Clearly, something's wrong with the driver. He is going into the other lane and then swerving back into his lane. It looks as if this car's pretty banged up. The front part of the car is almost completely ripped off, as if it just got into an accident or was in a previous accident.
It seems like this driver could be seriously impaired or dangerously drunk, and the people in the car behind them are terrified.
Be careful. They're very alarmed that the driver is going to cause an injury or death.
So they start recording everything on their cell phone.
Dad, stay back, Dad.
He ran the light.
As they try to follow the car from a safe distance, they call the police.
They're telling the police through 911 the detail of what is unfolding here.
We're about to be on 16 in Alabama.
You can see that they're trying to keep track of where they are, what streets they're on. How drunk is this guy? Or is this guy even drunk at all? Maybe he's under the influence of drugs. What, or God forbid, who did he hit with the damage caused to his car? And where is he going?
Oh my God! He was able to control it, but he didn't crash.
You hear the anxiety in their voices because the car is clearly damaged, which means that this driver's already hit something or someone.
He's driving really fast, man.
On the wrong side of the road.
And they are fearful that the driver is going to hit someone else, so they're doing everything that they can to alert the authorities to try to bring this to a close.
The driver isn't slowing down, and with every passing second, the danger to others on the road skyrockets.
He might hit somebody that is coming. Be careful.
Then, the car suddenly takes a sharp turn into a busy parking lot of a supermarket full of shoppers.
The pursuing car follows this other car into a parking lot, and they try to make some noise. They try to get the attention of a security guard.
Man, this guy broke that guy. He's really drunk.
And it's not working. So they decide they're going to continue to pursue him.
And when the Mustang finally comes to a brief stop in the parking lot, the driver of the following car decides he has to do something.
Hold on, I'm gonna try to get the guy out of the car.
As he and one of his passengers head toward the damaged Mustang, they have no idea what they're walking into.
The danger of them pulling this intoxicated driver who's under the influence of something out of their own vehicle.
Hey, what's up, man?
Put them in a very dangerous situation because they don't know if this driver's armed with a knife or a gun.
Stop it!
At this point, they don't know who's in the car. Is there one person? Are there many people? This is a huge unknown.
Stop it! Stop now.
There are people there. There are kids walking around. You're in a busy parking lot. How is he going to react to these people stopping him?
Come on, stop, man. Get the out of the car. Ale.
What's going to happen next?
Hey, what's up, man? Stop.
Cell phone video that a family shot as they followed an erratic driver.
That family was so worried, they took matters into their own hands.
Alejandro Fernandez had hoped July 22nd, 2017 would be a fun day of sightseeing with his family.
My sister and brother-in-law were visiting. He's Italian, so we wanted to take him to a pizza place in Houston, and that's where we're going.
In the car with Alejandro are his sister, her husband, and his 11-year-old daughter.
I was on the River Oak area, one of the nicest areas in Houston. You have nice shopping strips, nice restaurants, people with expensive cars in the area.
But a wildly swerving white Mustang changes the family's plans.
Oh my God.
He actually came out of my street and then he came towards me. He was struggling and almost hit me. Part of his car was gone already, and I knew it was bad news. So I had to get out of his way. I decided to follow him. I thought he was escaping from a hit and run, he hit somebody, ran away. My brother-in-law was videotaping the whole thing.
Be careful.
What I was trying to do is tell the police where we were,
So we're about to be on 610 in Alabama.
So that they would take care of it instead of me doing it. But at that point, there were so many people around that I felt I had to do something. Maybe he could have run over a kid. Maybe nothing would have happened, but if something would have happened, then I would have had to live with it.
It turns out drinking and driving is intensely personal for Alejandro.
My two best friends died. One of them, after partying about 10 years ago, he drank too much and crashed against a light pole. He just died hours later at a hospital. I have another friend. He went on his bike to get something. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit him. He died like 3 hours after at the hospital.
For Alex, this is definitely personal. And that brings an added intensity to the situation because there's a pretty painful past. I think that stirs about feelings where you feel like I cannot let another family suffer. I can't turn a blind eye.
Alejandro and his family follow the Mustang into a crowded supermarket parking lot. And then an opportunity to intervene presents itself.
When I saw somebody backing up and kind of blocking him and he had to stop, that's when I decided to jump out of my car and try to take him out of his car.
Hold on, I'm gonna try to get the guy out of the car.
I couldn't see inside at all. I didn't know if he was with somebody. It was like super dark windows. I had no idea who was inside with him. But he was by himself.
This is really intense. You don't know if this person has a weapon. You don't know what substances this person is intoxicated with.
Hey, stop, man! Stop it!
When I was able to open his door, he put his car in, I think in park by mistake.
Come on, stop, man!
Stop.
Just chill out.
Stop. He was trying to put it into drive again. And I was fighting with him, trying to get his hand out of the stick so that he wouldn't put the car into drive again.
Stop. Just chill out.
Stop. I tried to turn off his car, but I couldn't reach the ignition. And that's why I grabbed him and I tried to pulling out of his car because I know he was trying to get away.
Alejandro pulls 28-year-old Sirkan Ash out of the car.
Get the out of the car.
And he appears every bit as intoxicated as his reckless driving would suggest.
They pull him out of the vehicle and he's just kind of like, what's going on? As most drunk drivers are.
Alejandro and his brother-in-law put Ash under citizen's arrest as they wait for police to arrive.
All right, can we stop?
No. Okay. No, we're gonna wait till the police go here.
A citizen can make an arrest of someone, but they have to be turned over to the police without delay. Using physical force, they can hold them in place, and then the police will come and take over from that point, handcuff the person, put them in the car, and bring them to the station house to be processed for the arrest.
Right now, you're just under arrest, okay?
Yeah. So that's a good thing that he didn't put up a fight. He didn't get violent with the people who pulled him out of his car. He didn't get violent with law enforcement when they showed up.
HPD's here. Thank you. Okay. Yep.
After taking a breathalyzer, Ash is charged with a felony DWI because it's his third offense.
Their actions were quite impressive. It was very police-like in the way that they removed this driver, secured the vehicle so it didn't roll or drive away, and hold them there until the police arrived for them to make the official lawful arrest. All things considered, this situation came to a peaceful resolution. So you couldn't have asked really for a better ending.
In the moments after the arrest, Alejandro reflects on his decision to take action and how badly it could have gone.
I don't think I was thinking too much about what could happen.
Come on, stop, man.
I just wanted to stop the guy. I know he could have hurt somebody. I got nervous after the police took him, because you start thinking about what could have happened. I mean, something could have happened. He could have had a knife or a gun. Everybody had guns in Texas.
The video of the wild car pursuit and the citizen's arrest goes viral, and not without some controversy.
This is really intense and high risk. Having a child in the car just makes the situation even more stressful. However, this family decided that they were going to go for it.
I generally wouldn't recommend people start pulling other people out of their cars. You don't know what this person is on. You don't know if this person is armed. They don't know what they're about to get into. So they've now introduced themselves into a whole world of unknowns.
I know what I did was good and all that I care about. What I did was something that I think anybody could have done. I did it because it was the right thing to do.
Sure.
The rain that night did not fall gently. It struck the pavement like a warning, sharp and relentless, washing the glow of street lamps into long, trembling reflections, and somewhere between the sound of sirens and the hush of closed curtains, a young woman vanished from a London street as if the city itself had swallowed her whole. It was 1988, the final weeks of a decade that promised excess and confidence, and yet on this narrow stretch of asphalt, fear arrived quietly, without spectacle, leaving only a question that would rot in the dark for decades. How does someone disappear in a city that never stops watching? She had been seen at 10:42 p.m., stepping out of a late bus near Camden Road, coat pulled tight, head lowered against the rain. A routine walk home measured in minutes, not miles. Neighbors would later swear they heard footsteps, a brief exchange of voices, the slam of a car door muffled by the storm, but memory is a fragile witness, and London has always been loud enough to hide a scream. By midnight, the street had returned to normal, pubs closing, taxis crawling past, unaware that a cold case had just been born. By morning, the headlines were already sharpening their knives. Mysterious disappearance shocks North London. Woman vanishes after late bus ride. Words that felt dramatic at breakfast tables but failed to capture the dread creeping into the community. Police tape cut across the pavement like a scar. Officers knocked on doors, asked the same questions, wrote the same notes. Did you see anything? Did you hear anything? Did anything feel wrong? Most answers ended the same way, with a shrug, a pause, an apology. London, after all, was full of strangers. The victim's flat told its own quiet story. The lights were off, the bed untouched. Her handbag never made it home. No sign of a struggle. No note. No explanation. Just absence. To detectives, absence is a language, and this one spoke of interruption, of a journey that ended abruptly and without mercy. The working theory formed quickly, as it always does in cases like this. Abduction. Opportunistic. Wrong place, wrong time. But theories are only as strong as the evidence beneath them, and here, the ground was already giving way. Witnesses came forward in waves, then ebbed just as fast. A man seen smoking near a parked car. A van idling too long at the corner. Footsteps running. Footsteps walking. Footsteps that could have belonged to anyone. Each tip raised hope for a moment, then collapsed under scrutiny. The rain had erased footprints. Traffic had erased tire marks. Time was already erasing certainty. The investigation pressed on, fueled by urgency, by the unspoken understanding that the first 48 hours are everything, and yet with each hour that passed, the city grew colder. The community felt it immediately. Parents walked their children to school again. Locks were checked twice, then 3 times. Pub conversations lowered in volume when police entered the room. This was no longer just one missing woman. This was a fracture in the idea of safety, a reminder that even familiar streets could turn hostile without warning. Flyers went up in shop windows. A phone number repeated itself across lampposts and notice boards, pleading for information, any information, as if the right pair of eyes might still be out there, ready to remember. Detectives retraced her final steps again and again, standing in the rain with notebooks soaked through, trying to see what she saw, to feel what she felt. They examined bus timetables, questioned drivers, cross-referenced shift patterns, scanned criminal records for known offenders in the area. Faces emerged, then faded. Alibis were checked, broken, repaired. One man's story shifted by 10 minutes. Another's by 5. Not enough. Never enough. Suspicion hovered, but it never landed. As days turned into weeks, the case hardened, its edges sharpening into something heavier, more permanent. The missing person became a presumed victim. The search expanded beyond the neighborhood, beyond London itself, into fields, rivers, derelict buildings on the city's fringes. Each search ended the same way, with tired officers, muddy boots, and the crushing weight of nothing. No body, no weapon, no scene that could anchor the chaos. Just a city full of questions, and a file that grew thicker by the day. The press circled relentlessly. Cold case was not yet the phrase it would become, but the tone was already there, the subtle shift from urgency to grim fascination. Articles speculated. Experts debated. Armchair detectives found patterns where none could be proven. Every few weeks, a new break promised answers, and every time, it dissolved into silence. For the family, silence was the loudest sound of all, stretching on unbroken through birthdays, holidays, empty chairs at dinner tables. Inside the station, the investigation slowed but never truly stopped. Files were reorganized. Evidence was recatalogued. A few hairs recovered from the pavement were sealed in envelopes, labeled with care that suggested hope, or maybe stubbornness. Technology in 1988 could only whisper where modern science would later speak. DNA was a concept on the horizon, not yet the revolution it would become. For now, those samples slept in storage, waiting for a future no one could yet imagine. Years passed. Officers retired. New detectives inherited old questions. The city changed its face, glass and steel rising where brick and shadow once stood, but the case remained frozen in time, a snapshot of rain, streetlight, and fear. Occasionally, a call would come in, sparked by a memory resurfacing, a documentary watched late at night, a guilt that refused to stay buried. Each call was logged. Each was investigated. Each led back to the same dead end. By the late 90s, the phrase London 1988 cold case had entered police shorthand, a case study in frustration, in how easily someone could vanish without leaving a trace. It was referenced in training rooms, cited in discussions about missed opportunities, about the limits of eyewitness testimony, about the tyranny of time. And still, the question lingered, stubborn and unanswered, hovering over the street where it all began. Then came the slow, quiet revolution. New databases. New techniques. Old evidence pulled from shelves and examined with fresh eyes. What once seemed insignificant now carried weight. Fibers. Traces possibilities. Detectives who had never walked that street in 1988 now studied photographs of it, grainy and dark, trying to read between the pixels. The case file, once yellowing, was opened again, its spine creaking under the strain of renewed attention. The community barely noticed at first. Cold cases have a way of resurfacing without ceremony, without fanfare, until suddenly they are everywhere again, splashed across screens and front pages. When rumors began to circulate that the 1988 disappearance was being reviewed, reactions were mixed. Hope, cautious and fragile. Skepticism, earned through years of disappointment. And beneath it all, fear, the quiet kind, the kind that wonders what might be uncovered and who might be exposed. Detectives followed leads that had been impossible to follow before, tracing movements, connecting dots that had once been too far apart to see as part of the same picture. Names resurfaced, familiar yet distant, pulled from interviews conducted decades earlier. Statements were reread, not for what they said, but for what they avoided. Patterns began to emerge, faint but persistent, like an image slowly appearing in a developing tray. And then, after 35 years of questions, a name was spoken aloud in a room that had waited far too long to hear it. Not a conclusion. Not justice. Just a suspect, finally named, finally anchored to the story that had haunted a city. The announcement sent shockwaves through a community that had learned to live with uncertainty, reopening wounds that had never truly healed. But naming a suspect does not end a nightmare. It sharpens it. It forces the past into the present, demands answers where silence once reigned. As the cold case stirred back to life, London held its breath, caught between relief and dread, knowing that some truths, once uncovered, cannot be put back, and that the rain-soaked street of 1988 was about to speak again, whether the city was ready to listen or not. The name did not arrive with sirens or flashing lights. It slipped into the public record like a blade under a coat, quiet, precise, impossible to ignore once felt, and within hours the city was buzzing again, talk radio looping the same sentence, newspapers dusting off old photographs, neighbors staring at one another with the uneasy realization that the past had just stepped into the present. 35 years after a woman vanished into the rain, a suspect had been named, and the words London 1988 cold case were no longer a relic, they were a live wire. Detectives moved carefully now, aware that every step would be watched, dissected, judged. The man at the center of the renewed investigation was not a stranger pulled from nowhere. He was a familiar ghost, someone whose name had appeared once, briefly, in the margins of the original file, then faded beneath louder leads. Back then, his story had held. His alibi had been thin but unbroken. In 1988, thin was often enough. Now, decades later, thin felt dangerous. He had lived less than a mile from the disappearance site. A fact noted, then dismissed, in a city where proximity proves nothing. He had owned a vehicle similar to one described by a witness who could never quite remember the color. Another coincidence. He had been questioned, released, forgotten. Until technology, patient and unforgiving, reached back through time and tugged at a thread no one realized was still loose. The evidence that reopened the case was not dramatic. No sudden confession. No hidden diary. Just a reevaluation of what had been collected and shelved when science lacked the language to interpret it. Fibers lifted from damp pavement. Biological traces preserved more out of protocol than hope. In the late 80s, they were dead ends. In the present day, they whispered names. When the suspect was called in for questioning again, he arrived older, heavier, marked by years that had softened his edges and hardened his eyes. He did not panic. Panic leaves fingerprints. He was calm, cooperative, almost relieved to talk, as if he had rehearsed this moment without knowing it. Detectives watched his hands, his breathing, the way he paused before answering questions about a night most people had long forgotten. Some memories age into dust. Others stay sharp. He spoke of routine, of habits, of an evening like any other. He acknowledged knowing the area, knowing the bus stop, knowing the shortcuts people took to get home faster in the rain. None of it was illegal. None of it was proof. But the room felt heavier with each sentence, as if the air itself sensed the gravity of what was being said. Investigators pressed gently, then harder, circling the same moments, the same minutes, listening for cracks. Outside the station, the reaction was immediate and raw. Journalists gathered. Cameras clicked. Old neighbors were tracked down, their voices shaky as they revisited a chapter they thought was closed. Some felt vindicated. Others felt sick. The idea that the answer might have been nearby all along was harder to accept than the mystery itself. It suggested not just loss, but failure, collective and quiet. For the victim's family, the news reopened a wound that had never healed, only scarred over. Hope arrived cautiously, carrying fear in its wake. Naming a suspect meant progress, but it also meant revisiting the worst moments of their lives, replaying phone calls, sleepless nights, unanswered questions. Closure is a word used too easily. In reality, it is fragile, conditional, and often out of reach. As investigators dug deeper, inconsistencies surfaced, not loud enough to shout, but persistent enough to demand attention. Statements made decades apart did not quite align. Timelines stretched and compressed under scrutiny. A 10-minute gap that once seemed irrelevant now glowed on the page. Where was he during that window? What routes did he favor? Who saw him, and who simply assumed they had? Old witnesses were recontacted, their memories filtered through years of retelling, distortion, doubt. Some refused to speak, tired of reopening the past. Others leaned in, eager to unburden themselves of details they had dismissed as insignificant. A car door slam, a raised voice, a sense of unease they couldn't explain. Memory is unreliable, but patterns can emerge even from flawed recollections. The suspect denied everything, as expected. Denial is easy when proof remains just out of reach. His legal team moved quickly, reminding everyone that suspicion is not guilt, that cold cases are fertile ground for confirmation bias, for narratives built on absence rather than fact. They were not wrong. History is filled with investigations derailed by urgency disguised as certainty. Inside the case file, the language shifted. Where once there were questions, Now there were assertions carefully phrased, cautious but firm. Where once the victim was described in the past tense, now her presence felt immediate, almost tangible, as if the act of naming a suspect had pulled her story back into the light. Detectives spoke her name more often, grounding their work in the human cost behind the paperwork. The media, relentless as ever, framed the story as a triumph of perseverance, of modern science correcting old mistakes. Headlines celebrated progress, even as the investigation itself remained unfinished. The phrase "cold case solved" appeared again and again, despite the absence of charges, despite the lack of a confession or a body. Language raced ahead of reality, eager for resolution. But in the interrogation room, resolution refused to cooperate. The suspect maintained his composure, pushing back subtly, correcting minor details, never overreaching. He knew the limits of what the police could prove. He knew time had eroded more than evidence. Each session ended where it began, with questions unanswered and tension unresolved. Behind closed doors, detectives argued. Some felt they were close, closer than they had ever been. Others warned against tunnel vision, against forcing the past into a shape it might not fit. Cold cases are treacherous terrain. They invite hope and punish haste. Every decision now carried weight, not just for this case, but for the credibility of the system itself. As weeks passed, the story settled into a new rhythm. Not forgotten, but no longer breaking news. The suspect returned to his life under a shadow he could not escape. Neighbors whispered. Old acquaintances reevaluated memories, wondering what they had missed. The street where it all began drew quiet visitors again, people standing beneath the same street lamps, imagining the moment everything changed. The investigation continued, methodical, restrained, haunted by the knowledge that this might be the last chance. Evidence was sent for further analysis. Records were cross-checked against databases that did not exist when the case was born. Each result arrived with anticipation, then caution. Progress in cold cases is rarely linear. It stutters. It hesitates. It doubles back. And through it all, the central question remained, heavier now than ever. If this man was responsible, how had he lived with it for 35 years? If he was not, how close had the investigation come to repeating an old mistake? The truth hovered just beyond reach, visible enough to torment, distant enough to resist capture. As London moved forward, busy and loud and indifferent, the cold case lingered in its undercurrents, a reminder that some stories refuse to end neatly. The suspect had been named, the silence broken, but the night of rain and shadows still held its secrets close, waiting, watching, daring someone to finally pull them free. The deeper investigators went, the more the past began to resist them, pushing back with half-truths, missing paperwork, and the quiet erosion that only time can accomplish. Files from the late 80s bore the marks of an era before digital certainty, handwritten notes fading at the edges, audio tapes stretched thin from repeated playback, evidence logs that hinted at items once collected but never fully understood. This was the anatomy of a cold case, not dramatic in its decay, but relentlessly frustrating. One box, pulled from long-term storage, contained materials few believed would ever matter again. Clothing fibers sealed in yellowed envelopes. A plastic bag labeled with a date, a time, a location now unrecognizable after decades of redevelopment. The rain-soaked pavement where she had last been seen no longer existed in the same form. The city had paved over it, built upward, erased the physical scene while the crime itself remained stubbornly intact. Forensic analysts worked in silence, aware that expectations had been inflated beyond what science could guarantee. Every test carried hope, and hope in these cases was dangerous. A partial profile emerged, incomplete but suggestive, just enough to fuel speculation without delivering certainty. It did not point exclusively to the named suspect. It did not clear him either. Instead, it widened the circle of ambiguity, reminding everyone that cold cases rarely reward patience with clarity. The suspect's past was now under a microscope. Employment records, relationships, minor run-ins with law enforcement that had once seemed inconsequential, patterns of movement, patterns of behavior. Nothing overtly violent surfaced, no history that screamed capability. That absence cut both ways. Some saw it as evidence of innocence. Others saw it as evidence of control, of someone who knew how to remain unseen. People who had known him in the late 80s struggled to reconcile memory with accusation. He had been quiet, reliable, the kind of man who blended into the background of a city built on anonymity. Former coworkers described him as punctual, reserved, forgettable in the way London encourages forgetfulness. None recalled anything that night, or perhaps they had never asked themselves to remember. The investigation turned outward again, widening its lens beyond the suspect, re-examining the original assumption that the disappearance was a targeted act. What if it was random? What if the suspect had crossed paths with the victim by chance, a convergence of routine and opportunity? The theory fit the evidence, or rather, the lack of it. Random acts leave chaos, not patterns. They vanish into the noise. New attention fell on the bus route itself. Passenger lists no longer existed, but driver's logs did, fragments of routine preserved by bureaucracy. One driver, now retired, remembered the night only because of the weather. The way rain slowed everything, made the city feel compressed. He recalled a woman getting off near Camden Road, nothing more. He could not say whether she was followed. He could not say whether someone waited. Another witness, re-interviewed after decades, broke down halfway through the conversation. She spoke of a car parked awkwardly near the bus stop, engine running, lights off. She had dismissed it at the time. London was full of parked cars. Now, with hindsight pressing in, the image refused to let go. But she could not remember the make, the color, the driver's face, just a sense of wrongness. That sense became the emotional backbone of the case. Not facts, not proof, but the collective memory of unease that had settled over the neighborhood in the weeks after the disappearance. People spoke of changed routines, of glances over shoulders, of streets that felt narrower at night. Fear does not require details. It feeds on uncertainty. The suspect's vehicle history was scrutinized again, cross-referenced against what little could be recalled. Records showed ownership changes, repairs, gaps where documentation had been lost or discarded. A car is not just a car in an investigation like this. It is a mobile room, a potential crime scene, a moving witness. And yet, without the vehicle itself, without physical traces preserved in time, it remained an idea, not evidence. Pressure mounted quietly. Prosecutors wanted something solid, something that could survive a courtroom, not just public opinion. Detectives knew the difference. They had lived through cases where momentum outpaced truth, where reputations were ruined without resolution. The words cold case carried weight now, not just as a descriptor, but as a warning. Behind the scenes, the family was briefed cautiously. Updates were measured. Expectations managed. They had endured too many false dawns to trust fully again. Still, each new development stirred emotions long held in check. Anger, hope, exhaustion. The passing years had not dulled their need for answers. It had sharpened it. The media narrative shifted once more, from celebration to scrutiny. Commentators asked whether the investigation was built on science or storytelling, whether naming a suspect without charges was justice or spectacle. The city watched, divided, some eager for accountability, others uneasy with the idea of resolution manufactured from fragments. As autumn returned to London, mirroring the season of the original disappearance, detectives stood again near the old bus stop, now flanked by modern buildings, its past barely visible beneath layers of change. They spoke quietly, replaying timelines, imagining movements, trying to collapse decades into minutes. Somewhere in those minutes, they believed, the truth still existed, intact and waiting. But truth in cold cases is rarely obedient. It hides in the gaps between what is known and what is assumed. It tests patience, integrity, resolve. The suspect remained free, watched but untouched. The evidence remained suggestive, incomplete, maddeningly close to coherence. And as the case pushed forward, burdened by its own history, one reality became impossible to ignore. Solving a cold case does not mean warming it until it yields. It means stepping into the cold itself, accepting that some answers may never rise to the surface, and that the act of searching, relentless and unfinished, may be the only justice ever delivered. The coldest part of the case was not the evidence, or the lack of it, but the waiting, the long stretches where nothing seemed to move while pressure continued to build beneath the surface. Investigators knew they were approaching a line that could not be uncrossed. One wrong step, one public miscalculation, and the case would collapse inward, not with a bang, but with a quiet loss of credibility that no future discovery could repair. Behind closed doors, strategy replaced urgency. Every decision was weighed against what had failed decades earlier. Back then, speed had been everything. Now, restraint was the currency. Detectives revisited not just the facts, but the mindset of the original investigation, searching for blind spots that might still be shaping their assumptions. The city in 1988 had been different. Policing had been different. Victims' voices had not always carried the same weight. One question returned again and again, unspoken but heavy. Why her? If the disappearance was random, there would be no motive to uncover, no personal history to unravel. But if it was not, if she had been targeted, then the investigation had missed something fundamental from the very beginning. A connection. A moment. A threat dismissed as ordinary. Her personal life was reopened with care that bordered on reverence. Old diaries, letters, fragments of routine were examined not for drama, but for deviation. Any sign that someone had been watching. Any indication of fear. Friends described her as cautious, independent, predictable. Predictability, detectives knew, can be both protection and vulnerability. A former coworker recalled an incident once deemed irrelevant. A man who lingered too long near the office entrance. A conversation that felt wrong in hindsight. At the time, it had been brushed off. Now it was logged, analyzed, compared against other accounts. Names surfaced, then stalled, untraceable after decades of movement, marriage, migration. London does not keep its people still. The suspect, aware of the growing scrutiny, began to change his routines. Not dramatically. Subtly. Different walking routes. Fewer public interactions. Behavior that could be read as guilt or simply as self-preservation under a relentless spotlight. Surveillance recorded movements, not meaning. The law demanded more than interpretation. At the heart of the investigation was a single, fragile hope that somewhere, in some overlooked corner of the past, there was a mistake that could still be corrected. A witness who had been dismissed too quickly. A record misfiled. A detail that had not fit the dominant narrative and had therefore been set aside. Cold cases are often solved not by new discoveries, but by old truths finally taken seriously. An internal review revealed inconsistencies in early interview summaries. Statements condensed, paraphrased, stripped of nuance. It was standard practice at the time, efficient but imprecise. Now, those omissions felt dangerous. Detectives tracked down original officers, many long retired, asking them to recall not what was written, but what was felt. Unease. Doubt. Gut instincts never formalized. One retired detective admitted something that had haunted him for years. He had believed, early on, that the case would not be solved quickly. That belief, he said, had subtly shaped decisions, lowering the threshold for moving on. It was not negligence. It was resignation. The city had demanded answers. The case had offered none. The family listened to these revelations with a mixture of pain and grim validation. Their anger, once unfocused, now had context. Not blame, but explanation. The system had not abandoned the case out of indifference, but out of limitation, both human and technological. Understanding this did not ease the loss, but it reframed it. Meanwhile, public interest surged again as rumors leaked about internal doubts, about alternative theories quietly being reconsidered. Online forums lit up with speculation, timelines reconstructed by strangers, motives invented, connections drawn between unrelated events. Noise filled the spaces where evidence was thin, complicating an already fragile process. Detectives felt the weight of every headline. The phrase "cold case solved" now felt premature, almost reckless. They knew that naming a suspect had shifted the burden. Silence was no longer neutral. Every day without an arrest invited skepticism, fed conspiracy, eroded trust. Yet forcing a conclusion would risk something worse than failure. It would risk injustice. A renewed search was authorized, not of the city as it stood now, but of what it had been. Old maps were spread across tables. Redevelopment plans studied. Locations that no longer existed were identified as potential dumping grounds, construction sites that had swallowed land whole. If evidence had been hidden, it might be entombed beneath layers of progress. These searches were quiet, methodical, almost ritualistic. No cameras, no announcements, just teams combing spaces long forgotten, guided by probability rather than hope. Each empty result reinforced a truth investigators had long accepted. If there was a body, it had been concealed with intention or moved beyond reach. As winter approached, the case reached a strange equilibrium, active but stalled, alive but unresolved. The suspect remained a name, not a defendant. The evidence remained compelling, not conclusive. The city watched, caught between the desire for closure and the fear of a wrong ending. And beneath it all, the night of rain and streetlights persisted, unchanged in memory. A woman stepping off a bus. A street that did not look dangerous. A moment that lasted seconds and echoed for decades. The investigation could rewrite theories, reinterpret facts, even reshape public understanding, but it could not escape that moment. It remained the anchor, the point of no return, the silence that everything else revolved around. Cold cases are not frozen because nothing happens. They are frozen because too much happens without resolution. And as the London 1988 case edged forward, burdened by history and expectation, it became clear that whatever truth lay ahead would not arrive cleanly. It would arrive fragmented, compromised by time, and heavy with the knowledge that some answers, once delayed, are forever incomplete. The pressure did not explode. It compressed, tightening around everyone involved until even small movements felt dangerous. Inside the investigation, a quiet shift took place. The question was no longer whether the case could be solved, but what kind of truth could realistically be proven after so much time had passed. There is a difference, detectives knew, between knowing and demonstrating, between belief and evidence. Attention returned once more to the night itself, narrowed down to a window so small it felt almost cruel. 10 minutes. That was all. 10 minutes between the last confirmed sighting and the moment the street returned to its ordinary rhythm. In those 10 minutes, a life had vanished. Investigators replayed the sequence relentlessly, stripping it of narrative, reducing it to motion, opportunity, and timing. Traffic data from 1988 was limited, but patterns could still be inferred. Late-night flow, typical congestion points, shortcuts used to avoid lights. The suspect's familiarity with the area became more significant under this lens. He knew which streets emptied first, which corners stayed dark, which routes led quickly to main roads. Knowledge is not a crime, but in the wrong moment, it becomes a weapon. A new analyst, younger, unburdened by decades of disappointment, questioned an assumption that had survived untouched since the beginning. What if the abduction had not happened at the bus stop at all? What if that was merely the last convenient landmark, not the true point of contact? The idea unsettled the room. It meant starting again not from zero, but from a different angle. Reconstruction began. Footpaths, alleyways, doorways recessed just enough to hide a figure from passing traffic. The victim's likely route home was mapped with precision, factoring in weather, lighting, habit. In heavy rain, people shorten journeys, choose cover, alter routines without noticing. A choice made to stay dry could have placed her in the wrong place at the wrong time. Witness statements were resorted by geography rather than chronology. A voice heard 2 streets away. A car idling where it shouldn't have been. Individually meaningless. Together, suggestive. Not proof, but proximity. The possibility emerged that the encounter began earlier, quieter, and ended faster than anyone had imagined. The suspect was questioned again, this time with the reconstructed route laid out in front of him. He studied the map carefully, too carefully some thought, tracing streets with his eyes before speaking. He corrected a detail about one corner, mentioned a shop that had closed years before the disappearance. Knowledge that could be explained, or remembered. The line between the two blurred. His answers remained controlled. He denied contact, denied opportunity, denied memory beyond the routine. Yet there was a subtle change. Irritation surfaced where calm had once dominated. Not anger, frustration, as if the past was being dragged into the present against his will. Detectives noted it, aware that demeanor is a weak foundation on which to build truth. Elsewhere, another thread tightened. A tip came in, not from memory, but from inheritance. A woman clearing out her late father's belongings found a notebook filled with dates, routes, times. He had been a night shift delivery driver in the area in the late 80s. One entry stood out. A brief note about a disturbance near Camden Road. A woman, a car pulling away too fast. He had never reported it. He had assumed someone else would. The notebook was fragile, its ink faded but legible. The date matched. The time was close. The location aligned with the revised theory. It was not a witness statement in the legal sense. The man was gone. His words could not be tested. But the detail was specific enough to disturb the investigation's delicate balance. The vehicle described was vague, but the behavior was not. Sudden acceleration. No headlights at first. Then gone. It echoed earlier statements dismissed as unreliable. One more piece sliding into place, not locking anything down, but reducing the space for doubt. The suspect owned a vehicle capable of that movement at the time. Many people did. The city was full of them. Still, coincidence had begun to pile up, heavy and uncomfortable. Prosecutors reviewed the growing file with caution. Circumstantial cases can win trials, but they can also collapse spectacularly, especially when built on memories aged by decades. Public patience thinned. Calls for arrest grew louder, fueled by outrage and the human need for resolution. Others pushed back, warning against repeating historical mistakes, against sacrificing fairness for closure. The case had become a mirror, reflecting not just one disappearance, but society's relationship with justice, time, and truth. The family watched all of this from a distance they had not chosen. Each new detail reopened old grief, forcing them to imagine scenarios they had spent years trying to avoid. They wanted answers. They also feared them. Both emotions coexisted, unresolved, just like the case itself. As winter nights lengthened, detectives felt the familiar weight of diminishing returns. Leads narrowed. Options thinned. They were closer than ever, and yet the finish line remained invisible. The suspect was there, tangible, questioned, watched. The truth, if it existed in a form that could be proven, remained just out of reach. Cold cases do not announce their turning points. They drift toward them slowly, almost imperceptibly. And somewhere between a faded notebook, a revised map, and a man who knew too much about a night he claimed not to remember, the London 1988 case edged toward a moment that would either justify decades of waiting or add one more chapter to the long history of questions that refused to be answered. The case entered a phase investigators quietly dread, the moment when every new detail feels important and meaningless at the same time. Momentum existed, but direction did not. Files grew thicker. Confidence thinned. Each meeting ended with the same unresolved tension, the sense that the truth was close enough to feel but still refusing to take shape. Prosecutors demanded clarity. Not theories. Not narratives. Something that could be pointed to, held up, defended. A timeline that did not rely on interpretation. evidence that did not require imagination to complete it. The response from detectives was honest and unsatisfying. This was as clear as it was going to get. The suspect's past was dissected again, this time with a narrower focus. Not motive, but capacity. Could he have acted alone? Could he have moved quickly enough? Could he have hidden evidence permanently in a city that consumes itself every decade? The answers were all uncomfortable. Yes, possibly. No one could say otherwise. Financial records from the period were examined for anomalies. Purchases that suggested cleaning, repairs, sudden changes. Nothing decisive emerged. Time had flattened the details, turned transactions into abstractions. What might once have been suspicious now blended into the noise of ordinary life. Attention turned to behavior after the disappearance. Subtle shifts, job changes, moves across boroughs. A period of instability that could be explained by economic factors or by something heavier. Psychological experts weighed in, cautioning against retrofitting guilt to normal human patterns. People change. Lives fracture. Not every fracture is caused by a crime. The suspect, under increasing scrutiny, requested fewer interviews. His cooperation cooled, replaced by formality and distance. Lawyers spoke more often than he did. This, too, was expected. Silence is a right. And yet, silence in a case like this carries its own gravity, pulling suspicion toward it whether deserved or not. One piece of evidence refused to settle. The partial forensic profile recovered from the scene. Advances in analysis had refined it, narrowed its possibilities, but still not enough to point definitively to one individual. It excluded some. It included many. The suspect fell into the included group. So did thousands of others. Investigators debated strategy late into the night. Should they push for an arrest and let a jury decide? Or hold back, risk losing the window entirely, in hopes of something better? The law rewards patience only when patience is vindicated. Otherwise, it looks like failure. A decision was delayed. Not avoided. Delayed. The case hovered in limbo, its status uncertain, its future fragile. Outside, the world moved on. Inside, the same questions echoed, growing more familiar with each repetition. Then something unexpected surfaced, not from evidence, but from conflict. A former associate of the suspect contacted police, prompted by the media coverage. He claimed to remember a conversation from the late 80s, a joke made in poor taste, a remark about how easy it would be to make someone disappear in a city like London. At the time, it had been laughed off. Now it sounded different. The statement was weak, anecdotal, impossible to verify. Memories shaped by headlines are notoriously unreliable. Still, it added another layer, another shade of unease. Investigators interviewed the associate repeatedly, testing consistency, probing motive. He denied seeking attention. He admitted uncertainty. His account wavered at the edges, but the core remained. Psychological profiling revisited the suspect through this lens. Not a monster. Not impulsive. Someone capable of compartmentalization, of living an ordinary life alongside something buried. Profiles, however, do not convict. They explain after the fact. They comfort. They do not prove. The family was informed that the case had reached a critical juncture. No promises. No timelines. Just the acknowledgement that decisions were coming and that their impact would be permanent. Relief and dread arrived together. Waiting had been agony. Resolution, they knew, might be worse. Public discourse hardened. Some accused the police of hesitation born from fear of being wrong. Others accused them of pursuing a man without enough proof. The case became a referendum on the justice system itself, on whether time should dilute responsibility or intensify it. As spring approached, detectives revisited the location one last time, not to search, but to remember. The street was bright now, renovated, busy. No trace of the night that had changed everything. That absence felt symbolic. The city had healed over the wound, but the injury remained underneath, invisible but sensitive. The question that haunted the investigation returned with force. If not now, when? If not with this evidence, what more could reasonably be expected? Cold cases do not end cleanly. They fade or they fracture. They rarely conclude with certainty. And so the London 1988 case edged toward a decision point, not marked by revelation, but by exhaustion. The kind that sets in when every path has been walked, every possibility weighed, and the only thing left is to choose between imperfect options, knowing that whichever is taken will leave something unresolved and that the cold, once disturbed, never truly disappears. The decision, when it finally came, did not feel like a decision at all. It felt like surrender to reality, an acknowledgement that the case had reached the limits of what time would allow. Prosecutors declined to file charges. Not because they believed the suspect was innocent, but because belief is not a legal standard. The evidence, compelling in narrative, fragile in isolation, would not survive the kind of scrutiny a courtroom demands. The announcement landed without drama, a brief statement, careful language, no triumph, no apology. The reaction was immediate and divided. Some called it justice delayed and denied. Others called it restraint, the system refusing to gamble with a man's freedom on uncertainty. For the family, the words felt hollow. No charges did not mean no truth. It meant no ending. The door to resolution closed without ever fully opening, leaving them standing in the same corridor they had occupied for decades. The suspect returned to anonymity, at least on paper. In reality, anonymity was no longer available to him. His name had been spoken too loudly, too publicly. Neighbors looked at him differently. Old acquaintances avoided eye contact. Suspicion clung where proof could not. He was free, but marked, carrying a weight the law could not remove. Within the police force, the case entered a new category, neither active nor closed. Reviewed. Archived. Monitored. The file was labeled with cautious finality, a reminder that while the investigation had paused, the questions had not. Detectives who had lived with the case felt an unfamiliar emptiness. For years, the pursuit itself had provided purpose. Now, there was only aftermath. Some officers defended the outcome, arguing that justice includes the courage to stop. Others privately wondered whether caution had cost the truth its last chance to surface. Cold cases breed these doubts. They linger long after files are shelved, resurfacing in quiet moments, in dreams, in the spaces between new assignments. The media moved on, as it always does. New scandals. New crimes. The London 1988 cold case slipped back into the background, resurfacing occasionally in documentaries, podcasts, anniversary pieces that promised fresh insight and delivered familiar frustration. The story hardened into legend, shaped more by speculation than fact. The family withdrew from public view, exhausted by hope and its consequences. They held on to what little certainty they had, memories untouched by investigation, moments that belonged only to them. Justice, they learned, is not a single event, but a series of compromises with reality. Some questions, they accepted, would outlive them. Years passed again, quieter this time. The suspect aged further, his name occasionally resurfacing online, dragged back into conversations he no longer participated in. He denied involvement whenever asked, his denial steady, unchanged. Truth, if he possessed it, remained locked away, inaccessible to everyone else. Inside the archives, the evidence rested once more. Fibers. Notes. Maps. The notebook from the delivery driver. Each item preserved, waiting for a future that might never arrive. Advances in technology continued, but not all progress is retroactive. Some moments, once missed, cannot be recovered. New detectives would occasionally request access to the file, drawn by its reputation, by the allure of unfinished business. They read it with fresh eyes, saw the same patterns, the same gaps. Some believed they could solve it. Most eventually understood why it had resisted resolution for so long. The street itself carried on, unaware, indifferent. People walked it every night, checking phones, hurrying home, trusting the ordinary safety of routine. Few knew what had happened there. Fewer still thought about it. Cities forget because they must. But cold cases do not forget. They wait. They settle into the foundations, into institutional memory, into the quiet knowledge that not every wrong will be righted, not every disappearance explained. They remind those who inherit them that certainty is rare and justice imperfect. The London 1988 case remained what it had always been beneath the headlines and declarations. A moment interrupted. A life unresolved. A truth that hovered just beyond reach, visible enough to haunt, distant enough to endure. And in that space between what is known and what can be proven, the case continued to exist, not as a story with an ending, but as a question the city never fully stopped asking, whispered in the rain, echoed in streetlight reflections, carried forward by time itself, unanswered and unanswerable, but never truly gone. Time did what it always does when answers fail to arrive. It softened the edges, dulled the urgency, allowed life to reassert itself over absence. And yet, beneath that calm, the case continued to breathe, quietly, stubbornly, refusing to become history. Cold cases do not die. They hibernate, waiting for the smallest disturbance to wake them again. That disturbance came without ceremony. Not from a breakthrough, not from a confession, but from a routine audit of archived evidence, the kind of administrative task that rarely produces anything more than updated labels and digital records. A technician, younger than the case itself, flagged an inconsistency. A sample logged under one reference number appeared under another in a secondary database. A clerical error from decades earlier, invisible until systems finally spoke the same language. The sample was minor, deemed low priority. Biological material too degraded to analyze in the 90s. It had been tested once, briefly, then forgotten. Now, with newer methods, it was pulled again, more out of obligation than expectation. Cold cases are full of obligations masquerading as hope. The results did not arrive dramatically. No phone call in the night. No urgent meeting. Just a report uploaded to a secure system, waiting to be read. When it was, the room fell silent. The profile was clearer than before. Still partial. Still imperfect. But narrower. Much narrower. It did not exclude the suspect. It tightened around him. The inclusion was not definitive. It did not scream guilt. It whispered probability. Enough to reopen internal debate. Enough to force uncomfortable questions back onto desks that had learned to live without them. The case, dormant but not dead, stirred again. Prosecutors reviewed the findings with cautious interest. This was not the missing piece. It was another fragment. But fragments accumulate. They change the weight of a file, the tone of discussions, the calculus of risk. What had once seemed too thin now approached something heavier, though still not solid. The suspect was informed through counsel. The reaction was immediate and defensive. Cooperation, already minimal, ceased entirely. Requests were denied. Statements withdrawn. Silence hardened into strategy. Legally sound. Psychologically revealing. Or, perhaps simply prudent. Interpretation, once again, threatened to outpace fact. Word of renewed activity leaked, as it always does. The media returned cautiously this time, burned by earlier certainty. Language shifted. Developments. New analysis. Questions remain. The public listened with fatigue tempered by curiosity. How many times could the same story restart before it lost meaning? For the family, the news landed differently. Not as hope, but as obligation. They had learned what hope demanded in return. Still they listened. Still they waited. Waiting had become a form of endurance, practiced, familiar, devastating in its constancy. Investigators reassembled a small team, deliberately limited, insulated from noise. They revisited everything once more, this time with a singular focus. Not to solve the case, but to determine whether it could ever be proven. The distinction mattered. It always had. They scrutinized the suspect's earlier interviews again, now with fresh context. Minor contradictions resurfaced, still minor, still defensible. But patterns emerged in what he emphasized, what he dismissed. Places he remembered clearly. Others he blurred. Memory is selective. So is deception. Separating the two is an art as much as a science. A former forensic analyst, now retired, was consulted. He reviewed the evidence with the detachment of someone no longer responsible for outcomes. His assessment was blunt. In another era with another standard, this might have gone forward. Today, it would be torn apart. Defense counsel would dismantle the timeline. Experts would argue degradation. Juries would hesitate. The team felt the weight of that reality. Justice does not exist in a vacuum. It exists in courtrooms, bound by rules designed to protect the innocent even at the cost of certainty. Cold cases test that balance relentlessly. Still, something had changed. The case no longer felt static. It felt unresolved in a new way, active beneath the surface. The suspect knew it. The investigators knew it. The city vaguely sensed it too. The street remained unchanged, but its story had thickened. Each return to it added another layer of meaning. The absence of answers had become part of its identity, woven into the unnoticed fabric of daily life. And so the London 1988 cold case entered yet another phase, neither revival nor closure, but something in between. A reminder that time does not heal everything. Some wounds simply adapt, learning how to persist. The evidence waited. The questions waited. The truth, whatever shape it might take, waited as well, suspended in the narrow space between what could be known and what could ever be proven, patient, silent, and still unfinished. The renewed analysis changed the atmosphere without changing the outcome, and that distinction mattered more than anyone wanted to admit. The case did not move forward in public, but behind the scenes it tightened, drawing lines where once there had only been fog. Investigators spoke less, listened more, aware that any misstep now would not just end the case, but damage the integrity of everything that had come before it. Legal consultations became frequent and tense. Every new fragment of evidence was stress-tested against worst-case scenarios. Could it survive cross-examination? Could it stand alone if other pieces were excluded? The answers were rarely encouraging. Cold cases rarely fail because of what is present. They fail because of what cannot be recreated. The suspect remained silent. His life shrank, not through punishment, but through scrutiny. Travel decreased. Social circles thinned. He existed under a cloud that no court had authorized, but no headline could remove. Guilt and suspicion became indistinguishable to the outside world, and that ambiguity itself became part of the case's legacy. Investigators debated whether to pursue one final, aggressive tactic. A voluntary confrontation. Not an interrogation in the traditional sense, but a presentation. The evidence laid out, calmly, without accusation. A chance to watch for reaction rather than response. Some believed it was their last opportunity to break the stalemate. Others warned it could harden positions permanently. The meeting was requested, declined. Through counsel, the suspect made his position clear. He would not participate in any further discussion of the case. The door, already narrow, closed another inch. There would be no spontaneous confession, no emotional collapse. Whatever truth existed would remain protected by time and discipline. Attention shifted outward again, not to find someone else, but to confirm that no one else fit as well. Alternative suspects were reviewed with renewed rigor. Old names resurfaced, then faded under scrutiny. Alibis, once questioned, now held. Patterns failed to align. The uncomfortable conclusion returned. If the named suspect was not responsible, then the crime was either committed by someone who left no trace at all, or by someone who had died, moved, or vanished as completely as the victim herself. This realization brought no comfort. It only reinforced the sense that the truth, if not already known, might never be. Cold cases do not always end in revelation. Sometimes they end in exclusion, a narrowing of possibilities until what remains is silence. The family was informed that no further action was planned. Not officially closed. Not actively pursued. Maintained. Monitored. language designed to soften finality without denying it. They received the news with a stillness that came from years of practice. They asked no questions. They had heard every answer before. Public interest waned again, slower this time, like a tide receding reluctantly. The case had burned too often to ignite outrage anew. It settled into a familiar category: tragic, unresolved, complicated. Another cold case that flirted with resolution and retreated. Within the police service, the file was returned to archive with new annotations, new cross-references, a final layer added to its long history. Younger officers reading it in the future would see not just the facts, but the cautionary notes, the margins filled with reminders about assumption, about patience, about the cost of certainty pursued without proof. Years slipped by almost unnoticed. Technology advanced again. Laws evolved. Standards shifted. The suspect aged into obscurity, his name occasionally resurfacing in online discussions, debated by people who had not been alive when the disappearance occurred. To them, it was content. To others, it was memory. The street changed again. Another renovation. Another generation of residents. The past retreated further into abstraction, referenced more often than felt. And yet, on certain nights, when rain fell hard enough and the light hit the pavement just right, the city seemed to remember. The London 1988 cold case did not end with justice or confession or clarity. It ended with endurance. A record of what happens when time outruns truth, when answers remain just plausible enough to haunt but never solid enough to conclude. And in that unresolved space, the case continued to exist, not as an investigation, but as a presence, a quiet reminder that some stories are not meant to be finished, only carried forward, incomplete, into the future. The 10th year after the suspect was named passed without ceremony, marked only by a brief mention in a local paper that few people noticed. Anniversaries lose their sharpness over time, becoming numbers rather than moments, and yet inside the institutions that had carried the case for decades, the weight never truly lifted. The file still existed. The questions still breathed between its pages. A policy change quietly altered the landscape. New guidelines for cold case review mandated periodic reassessment, not for the sake of resolution, but for accountability. It was a recognition, long overdue, that unsolved cases do not belong to the past. They belong to the present, demanding periodic attention even when answers remain elusive. The London 1988 case was flagged again. Not prioritized. Not urgent. Simply unavoidable. A small team was assigned, not to investigate in the traditional sense, but to audit. To ensure nothing had been overlooked. To confirm that silence was truly the only honest outcome left. They approached it differently this time. Less emotion. Less narrative. More absence. They mapped what had never existed. No confirmed crime scene. No confirmed moment of contact. No confirmed mechanism. The case had always been built around assumptions that had hardened into structure. Now those assumptions were peeled back, examined one by one. What emerged was unsettling. Not proof of innocence or guilt, but proof of fragility. The original theory of abduction, while reasonable, had never been conclusively established. It had filled a vacuum left by disappearance, not by evidence. The possibility that the event unfolded differently, that the victim may have encountered harm elsewhere, later, or under circumstances never documented, re-entered the conversation. This did not absolve the suspect. It complicated him. It reframed the entire pursuit, suggesting that even the most compelling narratives might have been chasing the wrong shape of truth. Cold cases, the team acknowledged, often suffer not from lack of effort, but from early certainty calcifying into dogma. The suspect, now elderly, lived quietly. His health declined. His world narrowed. Interviews were no longer feasible. Even if charges were filed, even if a case could somehow be constructed, it would likely never see trial. Justice, delayed this long, was running out of time. This reality forced a reckoning few were prepared for. What does accountability look like when consequence is no longer possible? What does resolution mean when the subject of suspicion may soon be beyond reach entirely? These questions had no procedural answers. The family was consulted again, not with updates, but with transparency. They were told what the investigation could and could not do, what remained possible, what did not. It was the most honest conversation they had ever been offered. There was no promise of closure, only clarity. They listened. They asked one question. If the truth were known, would it be told? The answer was yes. As far as the law allowed, as far as evidence permitted. It was not enough. It was all that could be given. The team drafted a final internal report, not a conclusion, a record, a careful accounting of what had been learned, what had been assumed, and where uncertainty remained. It did not name guilt. It did not erase suspicion. It preserved ambiguity with intention, recognizing that false certainty would be the greatest injustice of all. When the report was filed, something shifted. Not relief, not defeat, acceptance. The case had reached its natural limit, not imposed by indifference, but by reality. Time had not solved it. Time had defined it. The street, unchanged yet unrecognizable from its former self, continued to host ordinary lives. People walked, talked, waited for buses, unaware of the weight that once pressed into the pavement beneath their feet. The city had moved on. The case had not. The London 1988 cold case remained unresolved, not because it had been forgotten, but because it had been fully confronted. Every path walked, every lead tested, every assumption challenged. What remained was not failure, but truth in its most uncomfortable form. As the file returned to archive one last time, its presence felt different, less accusatory, more reflective. A reminder that not every story yields an ending, that some exist to expose the limits of systems, memory, and certainty. And in that quiet recognition, the case settled into its final shape, not as a mystery waiting to be solved, but as a permanent echo, carried forward by those who remembered, those who questioned, and those who understood that some cold cases do not end with answers, only with the knowledge that the search itself mattered. The file was not closed. It was sealed. There is a difference that only people inside the system truly understand. Closed suggests completion. Sealed suggests restraint. The London 1988 cold case entered that final state quietly, without ceremony, without a press release, without a single definitive sentence to mark the end of 35 years of questions. Inside the archive room, the box carried the accumulated weight of decades. Not just evidence, but intention. Every label reflected a decision made under pressure, every annotation a compromise between urgency and caution. This was not a failure preserved in cardboard. It was a record of pursuit, of how far the search had gone before the ground gave way beneath it. The investigators who touched the case last understood something their predecessors had only begun to sense. Truth does not always arrive as revelation. Sometimes it arrives as limitation. As the moment when every remaining option leads not forward, but inward, forcing a reckoning with what can and cannot be known. No further testing was scheduled. No new interviews planned. The suspect, frail now, existed beyond the reach of meaningful consequence. Even his name had begun to fade from public memory, surviving only in footnotes, forum threads, and the minds of those who had lived through the original shock. Suspicion, like grief, does not expire. It simply loses its audience. The family marked another year without answers. No cameras. No statements. Just a private ritual of remembrance that had evolved over time, stripped of expectation, sustained by resolve. They no longer waited for the phone to ring. Waiting had been replaced by endurance, a quieter, heavier form of survival. What remained of the case lived on in fragments. In training rooms, where new detectives studied it not as a puzzle, but as a lesson. In policy reviews that cited it as an example of how early assumptions shape decades of effort. In unspoken reminders passed between officers that restraint is sometimes the hardest form of justice. The street itself offered no testimony. It never had. Cities do not confess. They absorb. The bus stop stood where it always had, serving strangers who shared nothing but routine. No marker, no plaque, no acknowledgement of what had vanished there. Absence does not announce itself. It blends in. Occasionally, a new inquiry arrived. A journalist, a researcher, someone convinced that fresh eyes could uncover what others had missed. They were always treated with courtesy, given access, given time, and eventually given the same realization. The case did not lack attention. It lacked certainty. Technology continued to advance, but not all progress moves backward. Some evidence degrades beyond recovery. Some memories decay into narrative. Some truths, once delayed, become untestable. The London 1988 cold case had crossed that threshold quietly, years earlier, without anyone noticing. And yet, it never fully disappeared. It persisted in the way unresolved stories always do, as tension rather than fact, as a question rather than a conclusion. Not who did this, but how something like this could happen and remain unanswered for so long. That question echoed beyond the case itself, touching every unsolved file, every missing name, every moment where certainty slipped through institutional fingers. It was the real legacy of the investigation. Not a suspect, not a theory, but a confrontation with the limits of control. The final entry in the file contained no revelation, just a date, a status, and a single line of acknowledgement. No further action possible at this time. It was not an ending. It was an admission. And in that admission, the London 1988 cold case found its true conclusion. Not in justice delivered or guilt proven, but in the enduring weight of the unknown. A life interrupted. A city altered in ways it barely remembers. A silence that outlasted noise, headlines, hope, and outrage. The case remains where it has always been, suspended between memory and mystery, unresolved not because it was abandoned, but because it was followed as far as it could go. And somewhere in London, on an ordinary street under ordinary rain, the echo of that night still lingers, faint but unbroken, reminding anyone willing to listen that some questions do not seek answers. They seek witnesses. Long after the paperwork stopped moving, the case continued to exert a quiet gravity, pulling at people who had never been assigned to it, never interviewed a witness, never stood beneath that streetlight in the rain. It became one of those stories passed along without prompting, resurfacing in conversations about why someone joined the force, or why someone eventually left it. Not as a mystery to be solved, but as a warning about how easily certainty can outrun truth. New generations of detectives encountered the London 1988 cold case, not through headlines, but through absence. An absence of conclusions. An absence of resolution. They studied it late at night, tracing timelines that ended in ellipses, learning how an investigation can be thorough, relentless, and still fall short. The lesson was not subtle. Do not confuse progress with closure. Do not mistake momentum for meaning. Outside the system, the case lived on in quieter ways. In the habits of people who had been young adults in 1988 and never quite shook the memory. In the way some still quickened their pace near bus stops at night, unable to explain why. Trauma does not always announce its origin. Sometimes it embeds itself in routine. The victim's names surface less often now, spoken mostly by those who remembered her before she became a headline. To them, she was not a symbol of failure or mystery. She was a person whose laugh had a particular rhythm, whose absence left a shape no investigation could ever fill. That truth existed beyond files, beyond evidence, beyond the reach of law. Occasionally, a rumor flared. A supposed deathbed confession. A message posted anonymously online. A claim that someone somewhere knew the truth. Each time, the process repeated. Assessment. Verification. Disappointment. The noise dissolved, leaving the silence unchanged. Cold cases attract stories the way darkness attracts reflection. Not because they are true, but because they offer space. The suspect, now little more than a name in a sealed record, passed from public consciousness almost entirely. Whether he carried guilt or merely accusation became irrelevant to most. Time has a way of equalizing outcomes. It does not care about innocence or culpability. It cares only about distance. Inside the archive, the file remained intact, preserved against future questions that might never come. It waited without expectation. No longer active. No longer dormant. Simply present. A fixed point in the institutional memory of a city that had learned, slowly and painfully, that some losses resist accounting. What the case ultimately exposed was not a single act of violence, but a pattern. The limits of technology. The fragility of memory. The way early assumptions harden into frameworks that shape everything that follows. The investigation had not failed because it lacked effort. It had failed because effort alone cannot defeat uncertainty. In quiet moments, those who had worked the case wondered about alternate histories. One witness taken more seriously. One record preserved differently. One technological advance arriving a decade earlier. These thoughts offered no comfort. They only reinforced the truth that timing, as much as intent, governs outcomes. The city continued to change. New lines on the map. New buildings where old ones had stood. The physical context of the disappearance eroded until it became almost theoretical. And yet, the story persisted, detached from place, anchored instead in the idea that even the most watched cities contain blind spots. The London 1988 cold case became a reference point not for hope, but for humility. A reminder that certainty is rare, that justice is constrained, and that the absence of answers does not equal the absence of meaning. Some stories endure not because they are solved, but because they resist simplification. In the end, what remained was not a question of who, or how, or even why. It was a quieter, heavier question. What does a society do with the unsolved? Does it bury it, archive it, forget it? Or does it carry it forward, unresolved, as a testament to the limits of control? London chose the latter, whether consciously or not. The case lingered, woven into the city's unspoken history, a shadow that lengthened at night and disappeared by day, never fully gone. And so the story did not end. It settled. Into memory. Into caution. Into the understanding that some cold cases do not wait for answers. They wait for acknowledgement. And that, perhaps, was the final legacy of a night in 1988 when a woman stepped off a bus in the rain and a city learned that even with decades of effort, some echoes never resolve into sound. Time did what it always does. It softened edges. It blurred urgency. It turned shock into reference, tragedy into precedent. The London 1988 cold case slipped into that long corridor where unresolved crimes go when they are no longer current, no longer headline-worthy, but still too heavy to disappear. Inside the system, the case number still triggered a pause. Not because it promised answers, but because it carried reputation. Officers knew it as the one that refused to settle. The one that had absorbed resources, attention, and faith, only to return silence. It was cited quietly, never theatrically, as an example of how far an investigation can go before certainty collapses under its own weight. There were moments when it almost resurfaced. A review committee re-examining historic failures. A budget discussion about reopening dormant files. A new piece of software promising pattern recognition where human memory had failed. Each time, the file was lifted, weighed, and set back down. Not out of indifference, but out of recognition. Reopening the case would not revive it. It would only repeat it. For those who had lived closest to the original shock, the case existed less as a mystery and more as a scar. They remember the atmosphere of that year. The way fear moved faster than facts. The way ordinary routines suddenly felt exposed. That sensation never fully left. It simply learned to coexist with normality. The city never held a reckoning. There was no anniversary vigil large enough to reset the narrative. No public inquiry dramatic enough to assign blame. The absence of resolution made spectacle impossible. Cold cases do not lend themselves to closure ceremonies. They end without permission. In private, some investigators admitted what they would never say on record, that the case had reached a point where knowing the truth might change nothing. That answers, if they existed, would arrive too late to repair the damage already done. Justice delayed had become justice diluted, not by negligence, but by time. The victim's story survived in fragments, in recollections that shifted with each telling, in descriptions that no longer matched photographs. Memory is not archival. It is interpretive. And over decades, interpretation becomes distortion, even when driven by love. What made the London 1988 cold case endure was not its complexity, but its ordinariness. No elaborate conspiracy. No dramatic twist. Just a sequence of small decisions, missed connections, and fading traces that, combined, proved irreversible. The most unsettling mysteries are rarely cinematic. They are procedural, incremental, human. There was no final suspect paraded before the public. No courtroom revelation to recalibrate the past. The case remained what it had always been. An open question sealed by practicality rather than truth. A reminder that systems designed to resolve chaos are still bound by it. And so the story continued to exist in a strange state. Not active, not forgotten. Present in the way unresolved things often are, hovering just beyond articulation. It lived in the margins of institutional memory and the background noise of the city itself. The rain still fell. Buses still stopped. Streets still emptied and filled again. London moved forward, carrying the weight without naming it. The case had taught the city something it would never officially acknowledge. That certainty is a luxury. That not every loss will be accounted for. That some nights never fully end. The London 1988 cold case did not demand attention anymore. It did not need to. Its power came from persistence, from the quiet knowledge that despite decades of effort, something essential remained unreachable. And perhaps that was the final truth the case offered. Not an answer, but a boundary. A line beyond which investigation becomes reflection, and resolution gives way to acceptance. The file remained sealed. The questions remained intact. And the silence, shaped by years, settled once more over a story that had long since learned how to survive without an ending. By the time the case reached its fourth decade, it no longer belonged to the moment of the crime. It belonged to time itself. The London 1988 cold case had become a fixed reference point, not for what happened, but for what failed to crystallize afterward. It stood as proof that even in a city built on records, witnesses, and surveillance, there are gaps wide enough for truth to fall through. Those gaps were not dramatic. They were quiet. A witness who hesitated. A memory that shifted. A report filed at the end of a long shift, missing a detail no one thought would matter. Each gap insignificant on its own, devastating in accumulation. That was how the case unraveled. Not with a collapse, but with erosion. In interviews conducted years later, retired officers spoke carefully. Not defensively. Carefully. They chose their words the way one does when navigating a room full of fragile objects. No one wanted to be the one who broke the illusion that more could have been done. The truth was more uncomfortable. Everything reasonable had been done. Reason, it turned out, was not enough. The city's relationship with the case evolved. What had once been fear became familiarity. What had once shocked now merely unsettled. The name resurfaced occasionally in documentaries and long-form articles, framed as a mystery, packaged for reflection rather than urgency. The tone changed. Less outrage. More contemplation. That shift said everything about how time reshapes injustice. For the family, the passage of years offered no narrative arc. There was no progression toward acceptance, no neat stages of grief. Only repetition. Anniversaries that arrived whether they were acknowledged or not. Questions that dulled, but never disappeared. The absence of answers became a constant companion, familiar but never benign. What haunted investigators most was not a single missed opportunity, but the realization that the case had reached a point where even the truth would arrive incomplete. Witnesses had died. Context had vanished. Motives, if they had ever been clear, had dissolved into speculation. A solved case, at this stage, would still leave holes. That knowledge, was its own kind of defeat. The London 1988 cold case began to function as a mirror. It reflected the limits of methodical inquiry, the danger of early certainty, the way narratives, once established, resist correction. It became a case study not in crime, but in process, taught quietly to those who would one day inherit similar files. Outside institutional walls, the story lived on in less formal ways. Online forums, late-night conversations, amateur theories constructed from fragments and intuition. These efforts were not malicious. They were attempts to impose order on uncertainty, to finish a story that refused to end. But the case resisted ownership. Every theory collapsed under scrutiny. Every confident claim dissolved into possibility. The absence of resolution was not accidental. It was structural, built into the moment when the last viable lead faded, unnoticed, into background noise. The city never stopped moving, but it carried the case with it. Not consciously, not visibly. In the way urban memory works, layering the unresolved beneath the everyday. The street where it happened remained ordinary, indistinguishable from thousands of others. That ordinariness was part of the discomfort. Nothing marked it. Nothing warned passers-by that something had been taken there and never returned. As years passed, the language surrounding the case grew softer, less accusatory, more resigned. Words like failure gave way to limitation. Blame became analysis. The emotional temperature cooled, but the weight remained. Cold cases do not lose mass. They lose heat. What remained undeniable was the impact. On policy, on procedure, on the quiet skepticism that crept into every investigation that followed. The London 1988 cold case changed how people worked, even if it never changed how it ended. Its influence was subtle, diffuse, and lasting. In the end, the case offered no catharsis, no moment of reckoning, no final scene. It simply persisted, a low-frequency hum beneath the city's noise, reminding anyone who listened closely that some questions survive because they cannot be answered. The file stayed sealed. The streets stayed silent. The story stayed unfinished. And London, vast and restless, carried on, knowing, whether it admitted it or not, that somewhere in its past lay a night that never fully resolved and a truth that, once lost, could not be summoned back. Not because no one tried, but because time, once it moves on, does not look back. By the 50th year, the case no longer felt old. It felt distant, a subtle but important distinction. Old things invite nostalgia. Distant things resist emotion altogether. The London 1988 cold case had crossed that line, slipping into a category reserved for events that are known to have happened, but are no longer felt as immediate wounds. That transformation was not mercy. It was erosion. Institutional memory thinned. Names once spoken with certainty were now prefaced with hesitation. Details, once considered foundational, required confirmation. The case survived, but in outline rather than substance, its sharp edges worn down by repetition and time. What remained was a silhouette of a crime, recognizable but incomplete. When new analysts reviewed the file, they did so without attachment. That distance gave them clarity, but it also stripped away urgency. They saw patterns, not people, decisions, not fear. The emotional gravity that had once driven sleepless nights was gone, replaced by professional curiosity. It was not indifference. It was inevitability. The family felt the shift most acutely. Invitations to speak dwindled. Calls from journalists became rare. The world had not forgiven or forgotten. It had simply moved on. Their loss, unchanged, now existed out of sync with public attention, frozen in a moment that no longer aligned with the present. The case's presence lingered in policy rather than practice. Procedures updated. Checklists refined. Lessons codified. All of it built on the quiet assumption that what happened in 1988 must not happen again. Progress, if it could be called that, arrived too late to matter to the people most affected. What remained unresolved was no longer just the crime, but its meaning. Had justice failed? Or had it reached the outer boundary of what justice can do? That question surfaced in academic debates, in training seminars, in late-night conversations among those who had chosen careers built on certainty. The case offered no guidance, only context. The city itself bore no visible scar. Generations passed without knowing the story. New residents occupied old buildings without awareness of what had once unfolded nearby. Urban life is efficient at replacing memory with momentum. London perfected that skill long before 1988. Still, the case refused to vanish completely. It persisted in databases, in footnotes, in the occasional resurfacing prompted by anniversaries that meant little to anyone except those who remembered the beginning. It existed as a reminder that even the most determined pursuit can end without resolution. The suspect's name, once whispered with intensity, now appeared rarely, stripped of power. Guilt and innocence blurred into abstraction. Without proof, without trial, identity dissolved into speculation. Time did what law could not. It neutralized the narrative. In the end, the London 1988 cold case became less about what happened and more about what remained. The unanswered, the unprovable, the moments that slipped past unnoticed and could never be retrieved. It stood as evidence that not every story bends toward conclusion. The final assessments contained no surprises, no reversals, just confirmation of what had been understood for years. The case would remain open in status, closed in practice, and unresolved in truth. A paradox sustained by necessity. As the city continued to expand and contract, forgetting and remembering in cycles, the case settled deeper into its foundations. Not as a warning shouted aloud, but as a quiet pressure beneath the surface. A reminder that certainty is temporary and that some losses are permanent. The London 1988 cold case did not end. It endured. And endurance, without resolution, became its final form. Eventually, even endurance settles into something quieter. Not acceptance, not peace, but familiarity. The London 1988 cold case reached that state without ceremony, slipping into the background of institutional life the way unresolved truths often do. Still present, still acknowledged, but no longer demanding to be touched. There were moments when it resurfaced unexpectedly. A new officer stumbling across the file during a routine search. A question raised in a seminar about investigative blind spots. A footnote in a report on historical cases that refused closure. Each time, the reaction was the same. A pause. A recognition. And then the careful decision to move on. The case had become heavy in a different way. Not emotionally volatile, but immovable. It sat there, resistant to narrative, immune to reframing. Every attempt to reinterpret it ran into the same barrier. Too much time. Too little left to test. Truth, if it existed in full, was no longer accessible through process. What lingered most strongly was the sense of proximity. Not closeness to resolution, but closeness to loss. The idea that the answers, whatever they were, had once been reachable. That there had been a window, brief and fragile, when the right question asked at the right moment might have changed everything. That awareness carried a quiet sting, sharper than anger, more durable than hope. For those who studied the case long after its peak, it became a lesson in restraint. In knowing when to stop pressing a story into a shape it refuses to take. In understanding that investigation has limits, and that crossing them risks replacing uncertainty with fiction. The London 1988 cold case did not invite speculation. It punished it. The family remained, as they always had, outside the arc of institutional logic. Their relationship with the case was not procedural. It was personal, continuous, unaltered by policy or review cycles. While the system categorized the file as static, their loss remained active, responding to every reminder, every absence, every unanswered question. They learned, over time, to speak of it differently. Less as an open wound, more as a fact of existence. Something carried rather than confronted. Grief, when prolonged beyond resolution, becomes structural. It reshapes life rather than interrupting it. Public memory thinned further. The story appeared occasionally in retrospectives, framed as a mystery from another era. The language softened. The urgency faded. What had once been described as shocking was now called puzzling. The shift was subtle but decisive. Distance had done its work. And yet, something stubborn remained. A refusal to fully disappear. The case persisted not because it demanded attention, but because it represented something unresolved at the core of the city's narrative. London prides itself on continuity, on record, on permanence. An unanswered disappearance unsettled that self-image. The street where it happened continued its ordinary rhythm. Footsteps, headlights, rainwater gathering along the curb. No trace of what had been lost there, except in the abstract sense that places remember even when people do not. The city had absorbed the event, layered it beneath decades of movement, but it had not erased it. What the case ultimately revealed was not the identity of a perpetrator, but the anatomy of uncertainty. How it forms, how it spreads, how it survives attempts to contain it. The investigation had not failed spectacularly. It had failed incrementally through the accumulation of small, reasonable decisions that closed doors without anyone noticing. By the time that reality became clear, there was no one left to hold accountable. No single error to correct. Just a constellation of moments that, together, proved irreversible. That was the most unsettling truth of all. Not that justice had been denied, but that it had slipped away unnoticed. The London 1988 cold case now existed as a quiet constant. A reminder embedded in training manuals, policy discussions, and the private reflections of those who understood what it meant. It no longer promised answers. It offered perspective. In the end, the case asked only one thing of those who encountered it. Not resolution, not judgment, but acknowledgement, an understanding that some stories do not conclude because they cannot, that some losses do not resolve into meaning, that some questions remain not because no one tried to answer them, but because time refused to cooperate. The file stayed sealed. The record stayed incomplete. The silence endured. And within that silence, the case continued to exist, not as an unfinished chapter waiting to be closed, but as a permanent margin note in the history of a city that learned, slowly, that not every truth returns when called.